Hello and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Audrey Lewis, Marketing Specialist at Telium, and I'll be your moderator. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. This webinar will last approximately 45 minutes and will be recorded. The recording will be made available at the end of the session. We have some related resources for you in the attachments section below, so please feel free to engage with them at any point. We also want to hear your feedback, so please feel free to leave a comment or a rating after the webinar. Now on to today's presenters. Jake Spencer is the Director of Product Marketing at Telium. Jake has spent the majority of his career working for enterprise technology brands in all aspects of branding, digital marketing, and web analytics. Cezanne Huq is the Senior Director of Growth at Molekule, a company that manufactures high-quality air purifiers. Cezanne has helped Molekule deploy Telium's customer data platform to facilitate better decisioning and targeting to improve advertising effectiveness. And with that, let's get started. Jake, over to you.
Thank you, Audrey. And Cezanne, thank you so much for being with us and going through this process today. I wanted to get everybody just in line on what the purpose of today's session is. And speaking with Cezanne, it's really talking about building a best-in-class stack and talking with somebody who has gone through that. What were the things that you had started to think about when you started to build your stack initially at Molekule? What were some of the hurdles that you face? How do you measure some of the work that you've done? And what are some of the things that you're looking to do in 2021? We kind of want to cover all of it. But Cezanne, as I get started, I wanted to start in the beginning when you first started working in Molekule and really looking at the customer engagement landscape, the tools and the technologies that you had available to you. Where did you get started? What business objectives were you initially looking to solve at Molekule? And how did some of those business objectives lead you to either evaluating a customer data platform or starting to speak about data in general against all of the engagement tools and technologies that you may have been using?
Great. Jake, thanks for having me. And Audrey, thanks for the really great introduction. We had a couple of key main objectives. We wanted to ensure that our targeting was effective from an advertising standpoint. And we had a lot of data that was sort of siloed across our different platforms that we were using, from Facebook to Google. And we just didn't have a really good, solid understanding of who were sort of desktop and mobile users deterministically, to are we spending efficiently in our advertising, and then how do we shepherd folks from awareness down to becoming a loyal customer. So that began the journey of, hey, we need something that's going to help us stitch and tie this all together, because we have to do it for our customers. That's how we built our product, our air purification product. It's human-centered, customer-backed, and first approach. So logically speaking, we wanted to look at platforms that took that same approach too from a data standpoint.
And there's a bunch of different solutions on the market that deal with data. How did you guys come to the solution that it was actually a CDP, a customer data platform, was kind of the solve for some of these efficiencies that you wanted to do, being a little bit more targeted in advertising when needed, suppressing when needed, advertising in the right place? How did you guys kind of come across and say, hey, it's actually a customer data platform that's going to be a nice solve for us here?
Yeah, so what we did was, well, first off, when I started at Molekule a couple of years ago, we did have a platform in place that did a bit of the things we were looking for it to do. But we started to think differently about how to manage our tech stack and the data, and then targeting and personalization to be more effective. And so we opened it up into proper RFP process, collecting all the key requirements across the teams, and then determined that we needed an omni-channel approach. We wanted to understand mobile and desktop. We also needed to ensure that the dev side and the analytics and data side weren't a sort of 1 to 2 year journey potential implementation. So looking at something that would help us effectively launch a solution relatively quickly, thinking in terms of like MVP to phase 1, phase 2 approach. So we can, really tackle the small but meaningful impacts to the business. And then how do we overlay and grow with the platform so we're not incurring tech debt? So there's a lot there that we did look at and consider, and also copaceticness with our advertising partners, right? And then finally, what platform would enable us to mature into sort of a cookieless world, right, in the future, which is imminent now and quite top of mind for many advertisers.
Very much so. So you mentioned, and I'm curious, when you talk about building a tech stack, often it's kind of the tools outside of the layer, outside of the layer that get talked about, right? What am I doing for personalization? How am I targeting and advertising? How do I build my analytics? And the CDP is a nice kind of middle section there to say, hey, we're going to compile this data into usable formats and customer profiles that allow you to work with these downstream tools a little bit better. What downstream tools? It sounded like advertising was important, but what other tools were kind of considered as you went through your CDP RFP to say, hey, you know what, we want to serve as advertising and analytics or customer experience? What was important for Molekule?
Yeah, very simply put, if you think of like just the concept of guiding someone from awareness to loyalty, you can probably, and each advertiser and marketer would probably know how to pinpoint like what tools in the supply chain are going to be critical endpoints for a customer data platform. For us, it was, the usual advertising, as you mentioned, Facebook, Google, and beyond, programmatic, OTT, CTV vendors that we work with. But downstream further, it was also our e-commerce platform plugging into Optimize for A/B testing. So all the things that we would want to do vis-a-vis personalization would always have a holdout group. So we built around that sort of design structure. And then further downstream, we have a platform that we use to manage marketing automation. So iterable was another key consideration for our endpoint management. And then, of course, other data warehouses to ensure that all of this information is being composited into a data warehouse, a customer profile, if you will, that we can continue to query, badge, and manage on a regular basis.
I'm curious, Cezanne, as you went through and you said, hey, here's all the destinations where we'd like data end to end up, and you started mapping to data sources, web and mobile were two that you mentioned as really important. How were you doing that prior to your customer data platform? Were there time efficiencies saved when you got a CDP in and moving a little faster, or not having to rely so much on ad hoc integrations? What was kind of the before and after like for Molekule?
Yeah, I would say on the front end of the upstream side of the advertising spectrum, the channels were managed in a silo. So if you think about the productivity gains, they were pretty enormous with a CDP. So programmatically piping audience data that were badged in Telium into Facebook and Google on a regular basis, by the way, no manual uploads to organize and harmonize the customer set. That enabled greater productivity, but also reduced our cost per acquisition. So now when we're doing a new customer initiative, we're actually doing it net new across multiple advertising platforms.
Gotcha.
And then on the back end, we know how well our campaigns are performing because we're not treating a desktop conversion as though they were different than a mobile conversion. And by the way, we're not marketing our mobile app per se, which we are going to be doing very soon through existing customers. but we've been predominantly mobile web and mobile web and desktop. So you see how important it is for an advertiser to ensure that we're not double dipping Cezanne, we're not counting Cezanne twice or Jake twice.
Yeah.
In the campaigns. And
it's really interesting as a former digital advertiser myself, it really is, when you say kind of these siloed channels, I used to also as well kind of report on how Google ad spend went and then Facebook ad spend. But if you think about the life cycle of a customer, it doesn't matter if I'm clicking on a search ad or clicking on a Facebook ad or engaging on a mobile app. I'm just engaging with Molekule, right? And I'm looking for solutions. And so being able to kind of holistically treat and break down silos and treat customers and the customer experience as one brand, unique, unified experience, pretty great. I think that's where a lot of businesses are striving to be with the tech stack. And it's ultimately difficult to pull off without that centralized view of the customer from those sources and then out to those tools that are actually going and proactively engaging with them.
Yeah, totally agree. Excuse me.
You're no problem. Last question in kind of the beginning phases of your CDP use cases and kind of building that out to your stack. What other team members did you bring along? Obviously, marketing was important, but who else was involved in that decision? I think a lot of the questions that we get sometimes from prospects looking into CDPs is, I have marketing use cases, but marketing might not be the only team that needs to evaluate this product along with me. And so who else did you bring along to kind of evaluate a customer data platform?
So we brought on, obviously, our the acquisition team is, part of the marketing team, the retention team, and then our front end engineers, just to make sure security, privacy, and data cross-border issues, as we also think about global, were met. Our customer satisfaction team, customer service team, because that's also part of the journey path that we're collecting. So we use a customer satisfaction tool, and we collect data on the front end. We also involved, of course, our analytics and data teams and our finance folks to knowing and anticipating that our management philosophy and objectives would actually change with the drastic difference in sort of the CPAs, right? And shifting to a customer acquisition cost and getting more deeper, more dynamic, variable data on a regular basis vis-a-vis Telium. So that was really important for us to have as part of the evaluation.
Cezanne, I'm curious because you mentioned some metrics there. How does your team measure the effectiveness of your customer data platform initiative? Is it, you mentioned, hey, are we reducing cost per customer acquisition? Are we maybe improving time of operations, building integrations, onboarding new data? How do you present back out to those stakeholders and say, hey, what we're doing here is really working for us?
Yeah, I would say there's probably like 3 different ways to think of KPIs. For us, it was the marketing side of the fence, and there's several critically important ones. How are we improving our customer acquisition cost? No surprise there, right? So I'd say on an advertising basis, specifically, it was ROAS. So are we getting a better ROAS out of that? So that customer acquisition cost just tells you the cost of that acquisition, but the return on ad spend allows us to understand the sort of combination of the two. It's an inverse, if you will, in some cases, but on the marketing side, that was really important. The third one in the marketing side was improvement on retention rates and LTV. And then broadly speaking, the second bucket was more like business objectives oriented KPIs. So looking at benchmarking campaigns that would have taken us to launch say about 6 months and being able to cut that in half by 3 months, right?
Yep.
So a good example of that is we have an initiative that we launched recently. It has personalization. It's tied to Telium. There's other factors apart from personalization that we feed into this campaign. It would have taken us 3 months. It only took us 2 weeks to launch because we were able to, off and running. In fact, I would say the bottlenecks were getting the landing page, creative and branding pieces squared away. And by the way, we should never discount and undervalue or underestimate the importance of branding, creative, and just creating a landing page, right? Those are crucially important.
Yeah.
But who'd have thunk that we could have launched, we were waiting for all these other assets to be complete to activate stuff that's being powered by Telium. That just is crazy in my mind.
And it's wonderful that you mentioned it, because we end up talking a lot about the data side at Telium, because that's often the piece that we're involved in. But really good personalization involves context. Who is this person? What is their appetite for my content? What products have they searched? Creative, and then content, right? And those 3 C's are really important into building the right personalization area. So I'm glad you mentioned that. It's so much more than data, but the context sets a lot of the success up of the creative and of the content.
Absolutely. So the third bucket was predominantly around cross-functional support. So how do we get more data to cross-functional departments outside of our own team, like the product side? So if you think about the CDP and take away advertising or just the constructs of like a typical organization, you do have a product that you're selling. That product may or may not have an app, but there's usage data and statistics that help you deepen the relationship with your customers because they want to understand X, Y, and Z. And then on top of that, the product team being able to improve that experience further is another part of the Telium, I guess you could say, scorecard, because if we're, it's not enough to just build something for marketing, right? Marketing is one facet of running Molekule. It's the product side as well. And so how do we fuel the same stuff that happens outside of product, right, on our websites and advertising, and bring that incredible resource capability into the product? And that's been something we've been working very closely on in 2020, end of 2020.
So Cezanne, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because that kind of brings us nicely to kind of where things started into where they are at now. How did you guys know that you were ready to maybe bring in more stakeholders or feed data to more teams? Was it getting a couple use cases under your belt? Was it getting familiar with kind of, what were the ins and the outs of a customer data platform for Molekule? What was kind of the indicating factor of, hey, we want to expand our use cases beyond marketing and now feeding some data to our product teams as well?
Yeah, it's a combination of things. Like any business, you have social architecture to consider. But the most important thing is the use cases being really crisp, communicating those use cases, getting sponsorship within the organization. So, in our case, we're not a 2,000, 10,000 person company. It should be relatively easy for companies our size, around 170 people, to be able to communicate very crisp, clear use cases and experiments that we're activating and their associated goals. And then also, it's not a one and done, right? So making sure that you're communicating progress, like, hey, we set out to do this, and we either met it, achieved, or exceeded it, or didn't. But more importantly, what's the succession plan afterwards, right? So each element of those use cases have a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. It's not a one and done in our mind. And so then you start to build this really interesting coalition of sorts where the product team will want to tap into the capability that the marketing team has built, and then it's a question of whether the capability we've built actually can service that side of the business, right? And if it's a yes,
Yep.
then it's a matter of like making sure that they have the appropriate use cases that support their business goals and capabilities, right? And I think that starts to create this sort of snowball effect to the point where we now have a lot of folks cross-functionally really interested in making CDP a requirement versus a feature.
So let me ask you two high-level philosophy questions that I think I often hear people considering a CDP ask. First and foremost is, in the situation that you're in now where you're along in your journey with a customer data platform, you've deployed successful use cases, you're really looking at it as a strategic part of kind of powering experiences, powering the product. How do you keep track of your stack? How do you ensure you have a visibility into what data is going where and what tools are actually connected to some of the audiences that you're building? And, how do you, evaluate the value of integration behind those? How important is integration to Molekule?
I would say that say no to tribal knowledge. Always document. It's good hygiene. I know it's like flossing your teeth every night. Hopefully folks do that, but philosophically, that is a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle thing, right? So when you think about the CDP side of the fence, we had going in, and I would encourage all of my colleagues that are listening to this is to really know and call out all the sources and endpoints that you really do want to integrate with. And then hyper focus on an MVP, because you're going to then find yourself boiling the ocean, because you're not going to be able to document all the data and arrays, values, key value pairs that are being piped in all sorts of different endpoints, and what data is coming from what source. So I think use documentation and process as a gatekeeping function so that you have a strong idea of what the MVP looks like, and then layer in cautiously new capabilities and document and improve upon that. That way, when every time you're adding something, it's like a product release, right? You may have an agile sprint process, you may not, whatever it is. Figure out what your regular cadence of releasing something will be, and make sure that you have clear understanding of what it is you're releasing and what the dependencies are, a la sources you're collecting data from and where you're piping the data to, and how you're using it, right? Because for me, I'm not a data person. I'm a marketer. I know what I need the data to be able to do to inform me, but ultimately, it isn't just the marketing side. It's not just the data side, right? It does take a village to manage this thing and make sure you have the right people to help you document the right things.
We really see it approached a lot as a team sport, right? Where developers will always need to be included for some complex use cases. Marketers need access to data for quick turn campaigns. Analytics professionals need access to that data in order to turn around insights with whatever tool that they might be using. And so we're really starting to see some of our best-in-class customers like yourself approach it as, like you said, a village or a team sport, whatever moniker that you want to use for that. But truly, it's the leveraging data across multiple teams that create the outcomes for the business that are the most advantageous.
Yep, that's great.
And move the quickest. Yep. Okay, a philosophical question, and then we'll move into your plans for 2021 and some future-looking questions.
Nice.
There's a lot of conversation in the market about build versus buy. You know, do I try and reduce the amount of tools in my organization in order to get those tools to work better? Or do I go through and I actually evaluate my tools that are the best at a specific thing, engagement, personalization, data integration and collection, and go that route and kind of leverage a CDP in order to integrate that? Or do I go, where is Molekule kind of ended up? You know, is it a hybrid of the two? Is it one or the other? Where have you guys kind of ended up in your philosophical approach to building MarTech?
Yeah, so for us, it's kind of a mixture of lease versus buy, just borrowing the automotive concept. So we do want to build as well. We're big on building capabilities, but the reality, I think, is we just don't have control over a lot of things. And I go back to Apple's IDFA change up in iOS 14. So, you know, do I build something that becomes, you know, a version or two old and is no longer relevant? Or do I work with a partner that, and then that goes into best of breed versus, you know, am I an Adobe shop versus, right, Google shop? You know, we've all had those conversations, I'm sure, at some point. But I think you have to, for us, Molekule, it's about making sure that our customer data platform partner is future-proof, and that the platform partners we integrate with support Telium and vice versa. So we do look at, I would say, we look at Telium integration as sort of a requirement, right? So we're in the process of evaluating an ad server now. Is it Trade Desk, or is it, you know, is it something else, right? So one of the key considerations is going to be, well, do you know, is it an out of the box integration? You know, or do we have to do webhooks and all that kind of jazz, right? So then we have to look at the level of effort relative to integrating with these partners and use that as a trade-off decision, right? And to me, I guess the analogy I would use is if you're in the keeping your body in top tip-top health, the core is important. So I think as any business and advertising company or advertising team, what's your core platform? What's your core need? Focus on that, get a solid future-proof partner, and then work around those. Anyone that says Facebook is a core platform, you know, I would say good luck to you. But those are, you know, I think figuring out your core, like we did, our Telium's our core. So now we know our vision is very clear, right? We know how to answer the right, you know, ask the right questions, figure out how to answer the executive level concerns related to integration, because it's resourcing, time and materials, right? What are the risk rewards for any future platform? But I'd say, you know, we are in the hybrid. We're probably not going to build any MarTech stacks. We're going to rent and partner with the best platforms out there that support our core capability now, which is, you know, Telium, which Telium is part of. Sorry.
No worries. And Cezanne, I'm going to steal the core reference from you, if that's okay. That's a good one. I like that analogy a lot. I think that's important to consider as you're going through and you're building tools around your data. You know, where are you most centrally focused, and how can that serve kind of the greater needs of everything else that you're doing? And it sounds to me like Molekule is really built around the data, and then up into using that engagement or using that data to then drive engagement and drive analytics, drive the right use cases and experience for Molekule customers. We've got about 5 minutes, so I'm going to ask 2 more questions, and we'll kind of go into some resources here for anybody listening who wants to learn a little bit more about what we talked about today. You talked about some key criteria for evaluating new tech. Hey, does it integrate? Are we making trade-offs here? What are the types of things that we look at cost? And so I'm going to move past that one because I feel like he gave a pretty good overview there, and talk about some new technologies that you might be considering for 2021. We don't need to name names, but maybe industry categories of where you're looking. I know you mentioned a few things. Obviously, browser changes are on the mind of many advertisers. Third-party cookie loss is on the mind of many advertisers, and hopefully Tealium is certainly a part of your solution there. But what other technologies might you be considering as strategic for 2021 that maybe they're new because of how business shifted in 2020? Maybe there were things already on your roadmap. What's this year looking like for you?
Yeah, there are 3 areas we're looking at. So I kind of teased it up at the top. We are viewing our brand as an omni-channel brand.
Yep.
So think about offline to online integration technologies. And a use case of that sort would be geofencing, conquesting,
Sure.
vis-a-vis geofencing. So any platform that provides those IDs and data points are going to be crucial. And the beauty is we have Tealium now, right, where we can bring that data in as a safe haven, right, and append to that customer profile. Second one is looking at international. We're in South Korea, India, and Japan. So how do we portability of this information? So how do we create intra company sharing? That's kind of going to be important for us because we're excited about being able to enrich that data further, and also building our own sort of ID graph, if you will, vis-a-vis Tealium. So if you think about a CDP, people never think about it this way, but it is our own ID graph.
Yep.
You know, your platform is enabling that. So how do we enrich? So the third one is, what are those third-party data providers that can enrich our ID graph further? So it's all for us to be able to provide the best experience for our customers, deepening the relationship, more emotionally tied. So the third-party data providers should have attitudinal, behavioral, interest type information that can enrich our data set as best as we can. But there's going to be a learning process, right? Because you can't just take we data and marry it to customer data stuff, right? There has to be campaigns we need to activate to join these 2 disparate sets of data. So that's going to be another aspect of what we look at too, is what are those technologies or ad tech stacks or personalization tools that allow us to activate initiatives on top of Tealium and our advertising platform that brings this really fantastic data together.
Awesome. Cezanne, that was my last question for today's session. You made it through the ringer. You've talked about where things started, where you're at now, where you're headed, and kind of what you guys are thinking about for 2021. I know you guys have an important initiative at Molekule going on right now. I wanted to give you the floor in order to talk through it and let people know how you're supporting small businesses.
Yeah, and it's not a surprise. 2020 was sort of the COVID year, completely ushering in a new era in global, consumer behavior, and it also pummeled a critical aspect of the American GDP, small businesses, and because a lot of these small businesses are so instrumental to neighborhood community growth and support, we began a customer-only campaign. Now it's opened up to everybody, and it's essentially for anyone to visit our website, click on this green banner that you see here. When you click on it, you can nominate up to 3 retail local businesses that you love, and submit that to receive a free air purifier, a mini basic air purifier. And they will also receive a package, a welcome package, to help them really maximize the air purifier so that that small business can reopen safely, particularly as vaccines are becoming more prevalent. 25% of Americans are now vaccinated and counting. And we're really excited because this initiative is essentially donating 4,000 air purifiers worth up to $1.5 million in USD. So really excited. And I wanted your folks to offer up their favorite local small business so that they can reopen safely.
Awesome. I have a local taco stand that I am going to submit because I want to make sure that they reopen safely. And that's such a wonderful thing that you guys are taking on at Molekule. So thank you so much. Cezanne, one last time, thank you so much for your time and your insights. I did want to just pull up a quick slide to let people know what other resources that we might have at Telium if you're just kind of getting started into the customer data platform space. In the attachments, we've got the direct links to a couple things. One, the landing page that I just went over for to submit the names of small businesses for Molekule's program, but a couple other things as well. We just released the State of the CDP. It's a kind of look into 2021 and how marketers are viewing CDPs, how they're using customer data platforms to tackle challenges accelerated by COVID-19, to tackle data privacy, to look at personalizing customer experiences, governance, all sorts of good things. And so that's a free resource that we've got available for download in the attachments. We've got a pretty hefty guide to everything that you need to know about customer data platforms as well. That goes over what a lot of Cezanne and I talked about today in terms of where should I get started with the CDP? How do I get buy-in? What stakeholders should I be bringing in? So that's another great asset, as well as the Joy of Data, which is kind of a CDP cookbook. If you want to pull off some of the use cases that Cezanne was talking about during the webinar today, that lays out a couple of ideas behind use cases that are great that you should consider CDP. So those are all resources in the attachments. And finally, we just wanted to say thank you for watching along and registering for today's webinar. Cezanne, last time, thank you so much for your time and walking through Molekule's journey with the CDP and how you guys are building a tech stack. It was really, really insightful, and I really appreciate you hanging out with us today.
Of course, thank you for having me. And I'll hope to see you guys soon.
All right, everybody. We'll see you later. Thanks.
Bye.